Why is this happening? That was the only question echoing through the minds of 50,000 spectators as they watched the impossible unfold in the heart of the Iron Sands arena. Welcome back to Chronicle Nexus, where we dive deep into the most harrowing legends and the mysteries that defy human logic. Today, we journey to a time when the spectacle of death was the ultimate entertainment. And one man was destined to be the final meal for a nightmare made of flesh and bone. The air was thick with the scent of copper and old sweat, the sun beating down like a hammer against the golden canopy of the emperor's box. Below, in the pit, stood a man who looked like he had already been forgotten by the gods. He had no sword, no shield, and no armor, only a tattered tunic and a gaze that remained unnervingly still. The crowd had come to see blood. They had come to see the last giant, a creature captured from the forbidden northern wastes. A beast that stood 15 feet tall, with skin as thick as iron plates, and eyes that glowed with a predatory, prehistoric hunger. For months, this creature, known only as the World Eater, had torn through every gladiator, every lion, and every criminal thrown into its reach. It didn't just kill, it erased. But as the iron portcullis creaked open, and the massive shadow of the beast stretched across the sand, reaching toward the lone prisoner, the atmosphere changed. The roar of the crowd died down to a frantic whisper. They expected a scream. They expected the sound of bones snapping. Instead, they got a silence so heavy it felt like the earth itself had stopped breathing. The prisoner didn't flinch. He didn't run. As the giant lunged forward, its massive fist poised to grind the man into the dust, something shifted in the creature's eyes. A flicker of recognition? A moment of hesitation? No. It was deeper than that. The beast's momentum halted so abruptly that the ground trembled, and in a move that defied every instinct of its violent nature, the last giant slowed. Its heavy breathing turned into a low, rumbling hum, and slowly, agonizingly, it lowered its massive head. It didn't bite. It didn't crush. It knelt. The beast of the arena had found its master, and the emperor's face turned from a mask of boredom to one of absolute terror. To understand why a creature of pure chaos would submit to a man in rags, we have to look back at the origins of the Iron Sands and the secret lineage of those who were once called the Whisperers of the Wild. For centuries, the empire had built its glory on the subjugation of the natural world, believing that steel and chains were the only languages a monster understood. They saw the last giant as a trophy, a symbol of their dominance over the ancient world. But as we look closer at the prisoner's hands, covered in scars that don't match the lashings of a whip, it turns out there was something about this man, something about his very blood that we haven't fully understood until now. You see, the records of the Imperial Archives were intentionally scrubbed. They wanted the world to believe the prisoner was a common thief, a nameless rebel picked up from the borderlands. But the truth is much darker and much more ancient. The prisoner wasn't just a victim. He was a key. For the last 20 minutes of the spectacle, the guards had noticed that the beast hadn't eaten. They thought it was sick. They thought it was saving its appetite for the main event. But the reality was that the beast was waiting. It was listening for a frequency, a heartbeat that matched its own, a connection that predates the very foundations of the city they stood in. When the emperor gave the signal to release the fury, he didn't realize he was actually reuniting two halves of a broken soul. The crowd watched, paralyzed, as the prisoner reached out a trembling hand, not in fear, but in a gesture of ancient kinship. His fingers brushed against the giant's scarred snout, and for a moment, the world of the arena, with its cruel laws and bloody entertainment, simply ceased to exist. There was only the man and the beast. But this wasn't just a moment of peace, it was the start of a cataclysm. As we dig deeper into the forbidden history of the arena, we find that this isn't the first time a beast has refused to kill. There are stories buried in the dust of history about a lineage of guardians who were tasked with keeping the balance between the human realm and the primordial titans. The prisoner, it seems, was the last of these guardians, and his presence in the arena wasn't an accident, it was a trap. But who was trapping whom? The Empire thought they were making an example out of a rebel, but they had inadvertently brought the spark to the tinderbox. The giant's submission wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a sign of fealty. And as the creature lowered its back, inviting the prisoner to mount the very platform of muscle and bone that was supposed to be his executioner, the emperor realized his mistake. The guards rushed to the edge of the pit, spears leveled, but they were trembling. How do you fight a monster that has found its purpose? How do you stop a man who can command the very embodiment of nature's rage with a single look? The mystery of the kneeling giant has haunted historians for generations. Some say it was magic. Others say it was a long-lost pheromone or a trick of the light. But those who were there, those who felt the vibration in the stone and saw the tears in the giant's eyes, knew the truth. It was the return of something that had been stolen from the world long ago, as the prisoner whispered a single word into the giant's ear. A word in a language that hadn't been spoken for 1,000 years. The beast let out a sound that wasn't a roar, but a call to arms. The arena was no longer a place of execution. It was the birthplace of a revolution, led by the very creature meant to end it. Stay tuned as we explore the hidden vaults of Chronicle Nexus to uncover what that word was and how one man's silence broke an entire empire. To understand why the air in the Colosseum turned from celebratory to suffocating in a matter of seconds, we must look beyond the spectacle. The word the prisoner whispered wasn't a command, and it wasn't a plea for mercy. It was Elwyn, the name of the giant's first keeper, a figure from a legend so old it had been reduced to dust and bedtime stories. But for the beast, that name was a spark in a cold, dark void. It was the key to a cage that wasn't made of iron, but of forgotten memories. As the giant knelt, the massive chains around its neck, forged from obsidian and enchanted with the Empire's darkest sorcery, began to glow with a faint, pulsing blue light. This was the first sign that the Emperor's control was fracturing. The crowd, which had been screaming for blood just moments ago, was now paralyzed by an unnatural silence. You could hear the fluttering of the banners in the wind and the heavy, rhythmic breathing of the beast. It was the sound of a mountain coming back to life. But why did this happen? Why did a creature that had spent 3 centuries dismembering champions and devouring kings suddenly bow to a man who possessed nothing but the rags on his back? To find the answer, we have to look at the prisoner's lineage. He wasn't just a common thief or a political dissident. He was the last chronicler, a member of an exiled order that had been hunted to near extinction because they held the true history of the world, a history the Empire wanted to rewrite. The giant, known to the masses as the Devourer of Sunsets, was actually a guardian of the threshold. It had been captured during the Great Siege of the North, drugged with alchemical poisons, and tortured until its mind broke. The Empire didn't just want a weapon, they wanted a symbol of their dominance over nature itself. By forcing a godlike creature to perform as a circus animal, they proved that nothing was sacred. Ternyata ada sesuatu yang belum kita pahami. It wasn't the prisoner who was in danger that day. It was the very fabric of the Empire's reality. You see, the giant wasn't acting out of a sudden surge of kindness. It was responding to a biological frequency. The chroniclers carried a specific genetic marker, a resonance that functioned like a master key for the ancient guardians. The emperor, sitting in his golden balcony, realized this too late. His face, usually a mask of cold indifference, began to twitch. He knew that if the prisoner survived another minute, the myth of his absolute power would crumble. The emperor raised his hand, signaling the Iron Sentinels, an elite squad of soldiers augmented with mechanical limbs and steam-powered armor, to enter the arena. "Kill them both!" he screamed, his voice cracking with a desperation that the public had never heard before. "Erase the beast! Execute the traitor!" But the arena floor was no longer a stage. It was a battlefield of shifting tides. As the sentinels charged, their boots clanking against the blood-stained sand, the prisoner didn't move. He kept his hand resting gently on the giant's snout. He was communicating through touch, sharing 300 years of grief and 300 years of hope in a single instant. The giant's response was visceral. It stood up, its massive frame unfolding like a collapsing building in reverse. The chains that had held it for centuries didn't just break, they shattered into thousands of jagged shards, flying into the stands like shrapnel. The beast roared, but it wasn't the roar of a predator. It was a frequency of liberation. The sound waves were so intense, they shattered the marble pillars of the lower tiers. This is where the conflict reached its boiling point. The Iron Sentinels unleashed their harpoons, firing heavy iron bolts designed to pierce dragon scales. One bolt struck the giant's shoulder, but instead of the beast collapsing, it simply reached up, pulled the bolt out with its teeth, and spat it back at the soldiers with the force of a ballista. The prisoner, meanwhile, began to walk, not toward the exits, but toward the emperor's throne. Every step he took was a defiance of the laws of physics and the laws of men. The giant followed him, acting as a living shield, its massive hands sweeping away waves of soldiers as if they were nothing more than bothersome insects. The crowd was now in a full-scale riot. Some were trying to flee, while others, inspired by the impossible sight of the beast and the man, began to turn on the imperial guards in the stands. The revolution hadn't just begun. It was spreading like a wildfire fueled by centuries of suppressed rage. Deep within the bowels of the arena, the secret mechanisms of the empire began to fail. The giant's presence was disrupting the magical conduits that powered the city. Lights flickered. The heavy iron gates that were supposed to lock the arena down began to grind and stall. The prisoner knew that his time was limited. The resonance that allowed him to connect with the beast was draining his life force. His skin grew pale and his eyes began to bleed, yet he didn't falter. The secret the Empire had killed thousands to protect was this: the giants were not monsters from another realm. They were the original architects of the world, and their blood was the only thing keeping the sun from fading. By enslaving the last giant, the Empire had been slowly draining the world's life force to power their technology. The prisoner wasn't just there to spark a rebellion, he was there to perform a ritual of restoration. Dan bagian terakhir inilah yang sering kita lewatkan. Everyone focuses on the power of the giant, but they forget the price paid by the man. To wake the beast, the prisoner had to offer his own soul as a bridge. He knew that by the time they reached the emperor's throne, he would be a hollow shell. He wasn't a hero looking for a crown. He was a martyr looking for an ending. The air in the arena grew thick with the smell of ozone and ancient earth. The giant reached the base of the emperor's balcony. It didn't attack. It simply stood there, a towering wall of muscle and ancient stone, waiting for the prisoner to speak. The emperor, now cornered and trembling, pulled a dagger from his belt, a blade made of the same material as the giant's chains. "You think you've won?" the emperor hissed, his voice echoing through the silent, terrified stadium. "Without me, this world plunges into darkness. The giants are gone. This one is a relic, a ghost. If you kill me, you kill the sun." The prisoner looked up, his eyes glowing with the same brilliant ancestral blue as the giant's heart. He didn't need to speak loudly. The silence of the arena carried his voice to every ear, from the highest rafters to the deepest dungeons. "The sun doesn't belong to you," he whispered. "It belongs to the earth, and the earth has come to take it back." As the prisoner collapsed to his knees, his strength finally failing, the giant reached out a single massive finger and touched the emperor's golden platform. It didn't smash it simply touched it. And in that moment, the gold turned to lead, the marble turned to sand, and the emperor's crown melted into a puddle of useless metal. The illusion of the empire's divinity was gone. The emotion in the arena was no longer fear. It was a heavy, weeping realization. The people saw the prisoner dying on the sand, and they saw the giant mourning over him like a father over a son. They realized that they had been cheering for the death of the very things that made them human. The beast wasn't the monster in the pit. The monster was the man in the golden robe, and the system that put him there. The prisoner's heart slowed. His mission was nearly complete. But as his vision blurred, he saw something in the giant's eyes, a reflection of a world that could be. A world where the titans walked free, and the people didn't have to live in the shadow of iron and steam. But the story doesn't end with a fallen emperor or a broken throne. There is a final layer to this mystery. A revelation that changes the meaning of everything the prisoner did. If you thought the revolution ended in that arena, you've only seen half the picture. The true beast of the arena wasn't the giant, and it wasn't the man. It was something else entirely, something that had been watching from the shadows since the very first brick of the Colosseum was laid. To see how the world finally woke up, and what happened when the giant took its first step out of the arena and into the city. You cannot miss the final chapter of this saga. The walls are falling, the sun is changing, and the true cost of freedom is about to be revealed. Tap the link for the final part of this epic journey on Chronicle Nexus. Don't let the fire die out now. The most shocking twist is still to come. The atmosphere in the Colosseum didn't just change, it shattered. Silence is usually the absence of sound, but this silence was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against the lungs of 50,000 spectators. Why did this happen? Why would a creature bred for slaughter, a titan that had leveled cities and crushed rebellions, suddenly lower its mountain-like frame to a man who possessed nothing but the rags on his back? This wasn't a submission of fear. It was a recognition of sovereignty. As the giant's forehead touched the blood-stained sand, a low vibration hummed through the earth, a sound so deep it was felt in the marrow of the spectators' bones rather than heard by their ears. The emperor, perched high in his gilded balcony, felt his wineglass shatter in his hand. He wasn't looking at a failed execution anymore. He was looking at a prophecy unfolding in real time. He had spent decades convincing the world that this giant was a mindless beast, a force of nature that only the empire could contain. But in one single movement, the giant had exposed the greatest lie of the century. The man, whose name had been erased from the imperial records, didn't run. He didn't take the opportunity to strike. Instead, He placed a trembling hand on the giant's massive, scarred snout. The skin of the beast was like aged stone, hot to the touch and pulsing with an internal rhythm. In that moment, a telepathic bridge seemed to snap into place. The spectator saw the giant's eyes shift from a chaotic, murderous red to a deep, sorrowful gold. This was the moment the world began to tilt on its axis. But as the crowd leaned in, mesmerized by the impossible tenderness, the emperor's shock turned into a cold, murderous resolve. He couldn't allow the people to kneel. A god kneel to a slave. He signaled his elite Praetorian guard, men equipped with harpoons dipped in the venom of sea serpents. They moved like shadows along the rim of the arena, their weapons glistening under the harsh sun. Ternyata ada sesuatu yang belum kita pahami. There was a layer to this connection that went deeper than mere friendship or ancient recognition. You see, the giant wasn't just a biological anomaly. It was the last living archive of a civilization the empire had spent 1,000 years trying to burn from history. Every scar on the giant's back wasn't just a wound, it was a line of code, a record of a forgotten era. And the man, he wasn't just a prisoner, he was the last person alive who knew how to read the language written in those scars. When the first harpoon whistled through the air, it didn't hit the man. It didn't even graze the giant. In a display of speed that defied the laws of physics for a creature of its size, the giant caught the spear midair. The metal groaned and snapped like a toothpick in its grip. The beast let out a roar, not of pain, but of command. It was a sound that didn't belong to this world. It sounded like 1,000 voices screaming in unison, calling for justice. The arena floor began to crack, not from the weight of the beast, but from the energy radiating from the man's touch. The sand began to swirl, forming patterns that mirrored the stars in the night sky. The emperor realized too late that by bringing these two together in the center of the world, he had provided the final components for an ancient ritual of awakening. He thought he was staging an execution, but he had accidentally staged a coronation. The guards opened fire with everything they had, arrows, bolts, and canisters of Greek fire. The arena became a cauldron of smoke and flame. Yet through the haze, the silhouette of the man remained standing, perfectly protected by the giant's massive arms. The giant was taking every hit, absorbing the fire, its skin glowing with a terrifying intensity. But it wasn't dying. It was charging. It was feeding on the very aggression the empire was throwing at it. The conflict escalated into a full-scale riot. The people in the stands, many of whom had lost families to the empire's expansion, saw the giant's defiance as a signal. If the ultimate beast could kneel to a man of the people, then the people no longer had to kneel to a tyrant. The beast of the arena had become the beacon of the revolution. Chains were being broken in the stalls, and the screams of the guards were starting to drown out the cheers of the bloodthirsty. Every step the giant took toward those gates sent a shockwave through the city's treasury. The gold coins rattled, the crowns trembled, and the records of debt began to catch fire spontaneously. The bond between the beast and the man had created a resonance that was literally dissolving the fabric of the empire's control. It was a symphony of destruction, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. But as they reached the threshold, the man paused. He looked back at the crowd, at the thousands of faces frozen in a mix of terror and hope. He realized that leaving the arena wasn't enough. If they walked out now, the empire would simply rebuild the walls. To truly be free, they had to destroy the idea that a giant could ever be a slave, and that a man could ever be lesser. The air grew cold, and the sun seemed to dim, as if it were holding its breath. The secret of the giant's origin was about to be fully revealed, and it was a secret that would make the emperor's crimes look like a footnote in a much darker book. The real battle wasn't against the guards or the spears. It was against a darkness that had been watching from the shadows since the very first brick of the Colosseum was laid. To see how the world finally woke up, and what happened when the giant took its first step out of the arena and into the city, you cannot miss the final chapter of this saga. The walls are falling, the sun is changing, and the true cost of freedom is about to be revealed. Tap the link for the final part of this epic journey on Chronicle Nexus. Don't let the fire die out now. The most shocking twist is still to come. The dust from the crumbling arena walls didn't just settle, it choked the very air of the capital, turning the golden afternoon into a gray, suffocating twilight. As the giant took its first monumental step beyond the threshold of its cage, the sound wasn't just a footfall, it was a heartbeat echoing through the foundations of 1,000 years of tyranny. The man, the one they called the beast of the arena, didn't lead the giant with a chain or a command. He simply walked, and the mountain followed. But as the city of Oakhaven watched in paralyzed terror, a chilling realization began to spread among the High Lords in their ivory balconies. They had always assumed the giant was a mindless engine of destruction, a relic of a primitive age captured and broken for sport. But as it moved through the narrow streets, it didn't crush the homes of the poor. It stepped over them with a precision that was almost graceful. It moved with an intent that felt ancient, calculated, and terrifyingly sentient. This wasn't a monster on a rampage. This was a king reclaiming his territory. And yet, there is something here that we haven't understood yet. For years, the legends told us that the giants were wiped out because they were a threat to humanity, that they were bloodthirsty titans who devoured the stars. But look closer at the way the giant looks at the man. Look at the way it shields him from the falling debris of the archways. There is a secret hidden in the marrow of their bones, a connection that predates the First Empire, and it suggests that the history we were taught was a lie, designed to keep us afraid of our greatest protectors. The march through the city wasn't a massacre, it was an awakening. People who had spent their lives bowing to the emperor's tax collectors now looked up to see a god walking among them. The man leading the giant, once a nameless prisoner, a man thrown to the lions, now stood as a bridge between two worlds. Every step they took toward the Palace of Suns was a strike against the status quo. The guards, usually so quick to draw steel, found their hands shaking. How do you fight a mountain that has decided it no longer wants to be still? How do you arrest a man who has the weight of the earth itself walking behind his shoulder? As they reached the Great Plaza, the atmosphere changed. The Emperor's elite guard, the Iron Phalanx, stood their ground, their shields overlapping in a wall of polished silver. They expected a charge. They expected the giant to roar and swing its massive fists, but instead, the giant did something far more terrifying. It stopped. It lowered its head, its breathing like the sound of wind through a canyon, and it waited. It was waiting for the man to speak. And in that silence, the city heard the voice of the beast for the first time. It wasn't a roar of anger, but a whisper of truth that seemed to vibrate through the stones themselves. He spoke of the binding, a dark ritual the High Lords had used to enslave the giants centuries ago. He revealed that the giant didn't kneel to him because he was a master, but because he was the first person in 500 years to speak to it in the language of the soul rather than the language of the whip. The man wasn't its tamer, he was its voice. This revelation sent a shockwave through the crowd. The beast was not the creature in the arena, nor was it the man who survived it. The true beast was the system that fed on the blood of the innocent and the chains of the ancient. The conflict escalated as the High Lords, desperate to maintain control, unleashed their final failsafe. They didn't use soldiers, they used the siphon, a forbidden alchemical weapon designed to drain the life force from the earth itself to power a weapon of pure energy. The air began to crackle with blue lightning. The very ground beneath the giant's feet began to wither and turn to ash. The giant groaned, a sound of profound agony that broke the hearts of everyone watching. Its massive knees buckled. Its skin, once like weathered stone, began to glow with a sickly, artificial heat. And this specific moment, is what we often miss when we talk about the fall of empires. We focus on the fire and the fury, but we forget the quiet choice of a single soul. As the giant began to collapse under the weight of the siphon's drain, the man didn't run. He didn't try to save himself. He climbed. He climbed the massive, heaving chest of the falling giant, dodging the arcs of blue lightning, until he reached its ear. He whispered a single word, a name that had been forgotten by time, the giant's true name, buried under layers of arena sand and centuries of mockery. The reaction was instantaneous. The siphon didn't just stop, it inverted. The giant didn't just stand back up, it transformed. The gray, stony exterior shattered like a shell, revealing a being of pure, radiant light and raw elemental power. It wasn't a creature of flesh and bone anymore. It was an avatar of the planet's fury. The iron phalanx scattered like dry leaves in a storm. The Palace of Suns, the symbol of 1,000 years of oppression, began to melt under the sheer intensity of the giant's presence. But as the light grew blinding, the man remained at the center of the storm. He was no longer just a survivor. He was the catalyst for a world being reborn. The High Lords fled into their bunkers, realizing too late that they hadn't just lost a slave, they had invited the end of their era into their very courtyard. The streets were no longer filled with fear, but with a strange, solemn hope. The people began to realize that the falling walls weren't a disaster, they were an exit. However, the cost of this transformation was steep. To anchor such power in the physical realm, a sacrifice was required. The giant was giving its light, but it was the man who was providing the vessel. His skin began to crack, glowing with the same internal fire. Every second the giant stayed in its true form, the man's life was being burned away like a wick on a candle. He knew this. He had known it from the moment he stepped into the arena and looked into the giant's eyes. He wasn't just fighting for his freedom, he was fighting for the right to choose how he would die. The emotion in the plaza was palpable. Thousands of people watched in silence as the man who was supposed to be a sacrifice became a savior. And the monster who was supposed to kill him became his monument. Tears flowed freely as the realization hit. The beast of the arena was the only one truly human enough to care about a world that had tried to destroy him. He looked out over the city, his eyes burning with a golden light, and for a moment, the entire world stood still. The sun began to set, but the light in the plaza didn't dim. It grew, reaching out like fingers of dawn, touching every quarter of the city, dissolving the shadows where the High Lords hid. The true cost of freedom was being paid in full, and the price was a life lived for the sake of another. The giant bowed its head one last time, not in submission, but in a final, heartbreaking salute to the man who had set it free. But don't think for a second that this is the end. The fire is spreading. And what emerges from the ashes of the Palace of Suns will change the map of the world forever. The most shocking twist, the secret of what lies beneath the city and why the giants were really imprisoned, is about to be unearthed. You've come this far. You've seen the giant kneel and the walls fall, but you haven't seen the final transformation. Tap the link for the concluding chapter of this epic saga on Chronicle Nexus. Witness the moment the world truly changed, and find out what happens when the light finally fades. The final secret is waiting for you. Don't turn away now. The dust from the falling arena walls hung in the air like a funeral shroud. But through the haze, a new world was beginning to breathe, as the floor of the great Colosseum cracked open, revealing a cavernous void beneath the sand. The truth could no longer be buried. You see, the people of the high city had been told for centuries that the giants were mindless harbingers of chaos, beasts that needed to be shackled to ensure the survival of humanity. But as the protagonist, the one they called a sacrificial lamb, stood before the kneeling titan, the vibrations from deep within the earth told a different story. This was not a tomb, it was a cradle. Descending into the rupture, the man and the giant moved in a silent, haunting synchrony. The onlookers, once screaming for blood, were now paralyzed by a terror that only comes when a lie of 1,000 years finally shatters. Beneath the layers of stone and iron lay an ancient, luminescent machinery, the heart of the world. The giants weren't prisoners because they were dangerous. They were prisoners because they were the batteries. Their very life force, their connection to the Earth's core, had been siphoned for generations to power the floating palaces and the eternal lights of the high city. Every luxury the citizens enjoyed was paid for by the silent agony of these mountain-sized beings. The high priest, desperate to maintain the illusion, descended into the pit with his remaining guards. He brandished a staff made of elder glass, a weapon designed to sever the soul of a giant. He screamed that this was heresy, that the beast of the arena must be put down to save civilization. But he failed to realize one crucial thing. The man standing beside the giant was no longer just a man. By touching the giant's forehead, a bridge had been formed. The memories of the ancient ones, the songs of the stars, the birth of the mountains, and the betrayal by the first human kings now flowed through the protagonist's veins. As the high priest ordered the attack, the protagonist didn't lift a sword. He simply spoke a single word in a language that sounded like grinding tectonic plates. The machinery of the city stalled. The lights flickered and died. The civilization built on theft began to dim, and for the first time in an eon, the true light began to glow from the giant's skin. And this is the part we often miss, the final secret that was erased from every history book in the kingdom. You see, the legends always said that the giants were conquered in a great war. But the third and most vital piece of this mystery reveals a darker truth. The giants didn't lose the war. They surrendered. They chose to be shackled because the humans of that era had threatened to destroy the very core of the planet if the giants didn't submit. They chose the chains to save the world from total annihilation at the hands of human greed. They didn't kneel to the protagonist because he was a conqueror. They knelt because he was the first human in 5,000 years to look at them not as a resource, but as a brother. He was the key, not because of his bloodline, but because of his empathy. The transformation was absolute. The protagonist's eyes began to glow with the same cerulean fire as the giants. He wasn't just a survivor of the arena anymore. He was the bridge between two worlds that had been violently torn apart. As the high priest charged, the giant didn't crush him. It simply exhaled, a breath of pure, ancient energy that dissolved the elderglass staff into harmless sand. The priest fell to his knees, realizing that his power was a shadow compared to the majesty of a world in balance. The walls of the arena didn't just fall, they were reclaimed by nature. Vines erupted from the cracks, turning the site of slaughter into a garden of rebirth. The protagonist looked up at the thousands of people peering down into the pit. There was no anger in his gaze, only a profound, heavy sadness for how much they had forgotten. He signaled to the giant, and together they began the Great Release. Across the continent, in hidden dungeons and deep mines, the other imprisoned giants felt the call. The chains of siphoned energy snapped simultaneously. The world didn't end in fire, as the priests had warned. It ended in silence, the beautiful, terrifying silence of a new beginning. The high city, no longer powered by stolen souls, gently descended from the clouds to rest upon the earth, forcing the elite to finally walk the same ground as those they had oppressed. This saga reminds us that the beasts we fear are often the very pillars holding us up, and the heroes we cheer for might just be the ones keeping us in the dark. The protagonist and the last giant didn't seek revenge, they sought restoration. As they walked out of the ruins of the Colosseum and toward the horizon, they left behind a world that was broken, yes, but finally, it was honest. The story of the beast of the arena ends here, but the era of the awakened begins. We often think that power is found in the ability to destroy, but the greatest power ever witnessed in that arena was the power to kneel, to listen, and to forgive. The man who was thrown to the giant found his destiny not in the blade, but in the bond. Thank you for journeying through this epic tale of betrayal and revelation. This is the kind of depth we strive to bring to every story we tell. The shadows of history are long, but here at Chronicle Nexus, we aim to shine a light on the mysteries that define us. If this story stirred something within you, if you felt the ground shake as the giant knelt, then don't let the journey end here. There are countless more legends waiting to be unearthed and secrets that the world has tried its best to forget. Join our growing community of seekers and storytellers. Make sure to like this video if you believe in the power of truth over tyranny. And subscribe to Chronicle Nexus to ensure you never miss a chapter of our ongoing exploration into the epic, the mysterious, and the profound. Turn on that notification bell because the next secret we uncover might just change the way you see everything. This is Chronicle Nexus, where the legends of the past meet the visions of the future. Until the next chronicle, keep seeking the truth beneath the surface. Stay curious, stay bold, and we will see you in the next story.